We've seen the devil. Now to face his mortal servants on earth. Witches, sorcerers, warlocks. They are all in the service of Satan and his hellish minions, who trade the salvation of the afterlife, their eternal souls, for the power to wreak evil upon the living world. Is there any escape for the practitioners of witchcraft? Can we ever be safe from these sinister monsters among us? What were witches before the invention of Christianity and the devil? Look no further back than ancient Greece, whose mythology is populated with gods, demigods, beasts, and creatures created out of the angered god's vengeance or pity. Hesiod's Theogony, an epic poem from around the 8th century BC, describes a goddess of magic who predates the Greek pantheon of Mount Olympus. Hecate was so powerful and revered that even the king of the Greek gods, Zeus, paid her homage.
Hecate, whom Zeus the son of Cronos honored above all. He gave her splendid gifts to have her share the earth and the unfruitful sea. She received honors also in starry heaven, and is honored exceedingly by the deathless gods. For to this day, whenever any one of men on earth sacrifices and prays for favor according to custom, he calls upon Hecate. Great honor comes full easily to him whose prayers the goddess receives favorably, and she bestows wealth upon him, for the power surely is with her.
Zeus comes into power by defeating the original gods, the Titans. One of the early gods, Hecate, wins his favor and is spared banishment. She becomes associated with the underworld, that realm of the dead in Hades, as well as the dead souls wandering as ghosts above ground. Statues of her are placed in doorways and at crossroads to keep the wandering spirits at bay. More destructive and decidedly evil is Circe, a true witch of Greek mythology. This enchantress is also a demigod. Her father was Helios, the sun god. She lives on the island Aiaia, some say as a banishment. When several of Odysseus' men feast at Circe's mansion, she drugs them with a potion and then transforms them into swine. One of the crew, Eurylochus, escapes to tell Odysseus. Under the advice of the god Hermes, Odysseus successfully restores his crew, and then enjoys a year on the Circe's island, as well as her company. As Christianity emerges with its single god, pantheons of gods, such as Greek and Egyptian, are deemed paganistic. The witch and the sorceress figure, in the eyes of Christianity, are no longer for God, but in tune with the devil. In the Old Testament, King Saul cuts himself off from God's favor. As the Philistine army prepares to overtake his kingdom, Saul yearns for the wisdom of the late prophet Samuel. Turned away by the followers of God, the priests and prophets, Saul takes his final resort and approaches the Witch of Endor, who communicates with the dead. The witch conjures up Samuel's spirit, who then issues a fateful warning. Saul and his 3 sons will fall in battle the next day. When his sons are slaughtered by the Philistines the next day, Saul knows his time is up and falls upon his sword in grief and despair. But did the Witch of Endor truly conjure up Samuel? Or was it a demon in disguise, one who created an ultimately self-fulfilling prophecy? In 1136, Geoffrey of Monmouth pens his tome Historia Regum Britanniae, the history of the kings of Britain, and in it reveals the sorcerer Merlin Ambrosius. Merlin's parentage is unclear. Some claim he's fathered by an angel and a nun. Others, particularly his enemies, accuse Merlin of being the offspring of a human and a succubus, and meant to counterweigh the teachings of Christ. Luckily for Merlin, his childhood baptism buries the latent evil within his soul. Over time, Merlin befriends Uther Pendragon throughout his rise to the throne. Before facing Uther's enemy Gaulois in combat, Merlin does use his powers for evil, although the result will create the paragon of nobility. Uther, desirous of Gaulois' wife Igraine, has Merlin transform him into a copy of his enemy. That night, Uther walks into Gaulois' castle, disguised as Gaulois, and seduces the unsuspecting Igraine. Gaulois is stricken on the battlefield the next day, and months later, Igraine gives birth to her son with Uther. He is Arthur, a boy whom Merlin will teach and mold. As the boy grows, Merlin does all he can to ensure his rise to power as King Arthur of the Round Table. Desirous of a magical sword, Excalibur for Arthur, Merlin meets the mystical Lady of the Lake. She is a water nymph, and Merlin finds himself desiring more than the sword, but also the enchantress herself. In some legends, Merlin teaches her magic, and she soon becomes more powerful than he. But the Lady of the Lake does ultimately banish Merlin to an impenetrable prison. Some say a glass tower, while other myths claim it to be a cave. As Arthur falls in battle and is taken to his final resting place, Merlin, undoubtedly, watches from afar, powerless to intervene. And he may still be watching today. In 1486, the fear of witches in Christian Europe leads German monks Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger to write the Malleus Maleficarum, or Hammer of the Witches. Not endorsed by the Catholic Church, this witch-hunting guide is put to use for hundreds of years in everything from identifying to punishing witches. Witches are a very real threat. Witches have gone from being mystical to signs of not only paganism, but Satanism. For a witch, the Christian God is renounced, and they embrace Satan as their one true savior. This is spoken out loud, or in a written contract signed in the witch's own blood. Their witness is another witch or wizard, or even the devil himself. These witches in waiting give a lock of hair, nail clippings, or a drop of blood in tribute. They are empowered to work Satan's magic during their lifetime and granted a familiar attendant or spirit to aid them in their horrific work. Familiars are sometimes kept within books or bottles until called upon by their witch master. Sometimes the familiar takes the form of a man or a woman, but oftentimes they take the form of an animal, which can be nourished with human blood. But in all cases, there is something wrong with them, be it a blemish or some mutation. Their names vary, from the French ver de lait, the German Hellekrug or Kuthus, to the English Griselle, Illemanzar, Kramega, Greedy Gut, or Vinegar Tom. As witches celebrate Satan's perversion of Christianity, they can also be recruited by smuggling a communion wafer from a church and giving it to Satan to pervert for his own purposes. Immortal playwright William Shakespeare uses witches and wizards in 2 of his most seminal plays. In Macbeth, the future king's downfall is spurred when he seeks out the counsel of 3 witches. Their prophecy that he will become king leads him and his wife to murder his friend King Duncan and his own downfall. For Shakespeare's final play, The Tempest, the wizard figure of Prospero is noble and good, yet his predecessor, the witch Sycorax, is foul and evil. Before the events of the play, she has trapped the sprite Ariel in a tree. Her foul offspring Caliban is a cambion, conceived by both Sycorax and the devil. Shakespeare's flights of fancy and dramatic portrayals of black magic could never parallel the true horror of the 17th century, the Salem witch trials. The puritanical village of Salem, Massachusetts, receives its first ordained minister in 1689, Reverend Samuel Parris. Parris will rule the town with an iron fist and perpetuate evils worse than those he claims to stop. It starts when Reverend Parris's daughter, Elizabeth, and his niece, Abigail, start having fits that are more than epileptic in nature and border on the supernatural. They convulse uncontrollably. They scream. They throw things across the room. They utter strange sounds, crawl under furniture, and according to an eyewitness, even contort themselves into unnatural positions. Another girl in Salem, Ann Putnam, also exhibits and claims similar episodes. It is ungodly, their behavior. If it doesn't come directly from the devil, then it must be from his minions. On February 29th, 1692, after the girls are pressured to reveal their afflictors by 2 magistrates, they name 3 women. Tituba is Reverend Parris's Caribbean slave. Sarah Good is a homeless beggar. And Sarah Osborne, an elderly widow. To the villagers, there is no doubt that the women are witches acting out the devil's work. On March 1st, the 3 women are brought before the magistrates and interrogated for several days. Good and Osborne deny the charges. Witnesses claim to have seen Sarah Good flying to coven meetings at night, and even her own husband claims her on the path towards, if not already realized, becoming a witch. Good's daughter, Sarah, only 4 years old, testifies against her own mother and is herself jailed for witchcraft. Tituba, accused of telling young girls stories of incubi and devils from the Malleus Maleficarum, finally confesses. She says, "The devil came to me and bid me serve him, and that a man in black enticed her to sign a book. The devil's book contains the signatures of his witches, written in blood." The 3 women are imprisoned. Tituba, who has inadvertently fueled the fire of witch hunting, is later released. Salem is overtaken with a paranoid fear of black magic. Several more women are accused of witchcraft, including an active member of the church. Osborne is hanged on May 10th, while on July 29th, Good is hanged, along with more found guilty of witchcraft. Then there's Giles Corey. The prosperous farmer is dragged into the witch hunt on April 18th, 1692, accused of being a warlock. One of the girls accusing him, Mercy Lewis, is 19. It is September 9th.
I saw the apparition of Giles Corey come and afflict me, urging me to write in his book. And so he continued most dreadfully to hurt me, by times beating me and almost breaking my back, till the day of his examination, being the 19th of April. And then also during the time of his examination did he affect and torture me most grievously, and also several times since, urging me vehemently to write in his book. And I verily believe in my heart that Giles Corey is a dreadful wizard. For since he had been in prison, he or his appearance has come and most grievously tormented me.
Corey refuses to plead. The law's punishment is draconian at best. Peine forte et dure is where a prisoner is laid down beneath a heavy board. Boulders and rocks are placed upon it and pressed until he makes a plea. On September 17th, after months in prison, Corey is taken to a nearby field where Sheriff George Corwin has 6 men place heavy stones, one at a time, on top of him. He refuses to even cry out. 2 days later, urged to plead either way, Giles calls out, "More weight." Governor William Phips is concerned about the witchcraft scourge, and on May 27, 1692, he establishes a special order of oyer and terminaire to try witches. Bridget Bishop's case is the first they hear. Known for her promiscuity about the village, she is quickly found guilty and hanged on June 10th. A growing concern is the admissibility of spectral evidence, where witnesses testify about visions and dreams. Governor Phips takes note of the pleas against spectral evidence, primarily after his own wife finds herself questioned for witchcraft. On October 29th, Phips dissolves the court of oyer and terminaire and replaces it with the Superior Court of Judicature. The main difference is that Judicature does not allow spectral evidence. Only 3 of 56 defendants are condemned. By May 1693, Phips pardons the survivors of the Salem witch trials and releases them from jail. In the end, the devil's work was committed by the hysterical masses of Salem. 200 stood accused, 19 were hanged, and Corey was pressed to death. Legend has it that Corey appears walking in the graveyard before disaster strikes Salem, a village that eternally remains his home.
I think witches historically were probably just people who were very independent thinkers, and I think that wasn't permissible. And it certainly was forbidden for women, especially, to sort of be their own person, be into their own thing, maybe not put all the corseting and stuff that they were required to put on, maybe dress a little differently, maybe wear all black. They were like the first counterculture kids, I think, witches. They just sort of went to the beat of their own drummer, they wore all black, they had their black cat, they were into all this sort of gothic stuff and weird baubles and collecting. And they were nerds, sort of, too, I think. I think I see all monsters as nerds, perhaps. Maybe that's just me, I don't know. But I think they just didn't fit in. I think they were misfit, and there's always that kind of, well, why is that person over there so satisfied with themselves and what they're doing? Let's just drag them out of their house and burn them. I think that's the hive mind mentality. Whenever someone is able to find their own way and sort of be their own person. Maybe that's a real bad attitude. But I think most witches are misunderstood. They weren't monsters. They just were different, and they were people who had different ways, different beliefs, different modes of dress. different traditions, and it just kind of spooked the straights. They don't like it. Whenever there's a movie about witches, I always approach it with like, are they going to be able to approach this material and come up with something that's A, scary, B, works as a movie? Witches and ghosts are probably the two hardest, just because, it's all about mystery. Once you kind of reveal what they're all about, then it's really hard. They just kind of disappear, because the whole mystery is what makes them fascinating, and the less we know about them, the more interesting they are.
Slavic folklore gives birth to the Baba Yaga, a sinister-looking old woman who flies around in a large mortar steered with a pestle. Her house, mounted on chicken legs, runs through the forest. Baba Yaga and Zamoshek, collected in the 1800s by Alexander Nikolaevich Afanaseyev, tells of a more diabolical Baba Yaga. 41 sons arrive at the castle of the Baba Yaga in search of wives. Baba Yaga lets them marry her 41 daughters, and, the night after the wedding, the brother Zamoshek learns the frightening truth behind Yaga's charity, straight from the horse's mouth. At midnight, Baba Yaga cries out for her servants to behead the men. The servants kill her daughters, who are dressed in the brothers' clothes instead. Baba Yaga discovers the truth the next morning when she looks outside to see the heads of all 41 daughters on stakes and the brothers gone. Another story in the same volume tells of Ivashko, who ventures into a subterranean world to gather 3 wives for himself and his 2 brothers. His brothers, however, cut the ladder for him to return to the upper world after taking off with the brides-to-be. A giant sends Ivashko to the home of the Baba Yaga, a hut on rooster's legs.
So the young boy went on and on far away to the hut and stepped in. The Baba Yaga cried out, "Fie-fo-fum, Russian bones, why have you come here? Oh, mother, the giant has sent me to ask you to lend me your mighty eagle to carry me to Russia." "Go," said the Baba Yaga. "Go into the garden. At the gate there stands a watchman. Take his keys and pass through the 7 doors. And when you open the last, the eagle will flap its wings. Sit on its back if you are not afraid, and fly away. But take meat with you, and give him to eat whenever he turns round."
In this tale, the Baba Yaga serves as a fairy godmother type and uses her magic for good. But not so in the folk tales from the Russian, written by Vera Xenofontovna Kalamantiano de Blumenthal from 1903. When an evil stepmother tires of her husband's son and daughter, she sends them to the woods to meet her mother, who lives in the forest in a hut on hen's feet. Before they go, however, they visit their father's mother, who tells them the truth. They are being sent to a witch, one whom they must face.
The obedient children arrived at the forest, and oh wonder, there stood a hut, and what a curious one! It stood on tiny hen's feet, and at the top was a rooster's head. With their shrill, childish voices, they cried out aloud, "Izbushka, Izbushka, turn thy back to the forest, and thy front to us." And the hut did as they commanded. The 2 orphans looked inside and saw the witch resting there, her head near the threshold, 1 foot in one corner, and 1 foot in the other, her knees quite close to the ridgepole. "Foul, foul, foul!" exclaimed the witch. "I feel the Russian spirit." The children were afraid and stood close, very close together. But in spite of their fear, they said very politely, "Oh, grandmother, our stepmother sent us here to serve thee." "All right, I am not opposed to keeping you children. If you satisfy my wishes, I shall reward you. If not, I shall eat you up."
The children are helped by the animals around the Baba Yaga's hut, including mice and a black cat, and they are able to escape. When they get home, their father banishes the stepmother, and the three live happily ever after. It is here that the origin of the witch's name becomes apparent. Baba means grandmother, and Yaga, witch. The parallels with Hansel and Gretel, a German folktale recorded by the brothers Grimm around 1812, are uncanny. When Hansel and Gretel find out that their parents are going to abandon them in the woods, Hansel leaves a trail of pebbles to find their way home. The father is relieved when they return, yet their mother insists on taking them out the next day. This time, all Hansel has to leave a trail with are breadcrumbs. Three days later, they come across a magical house made of bread and covered with cakes. The windows are made of clear sugar.
The roof was made of ginger snaps, the chimney of blocks of taffy candy, and the sides were covered with frosted cookies.
As the children start to eat the house, its inhabitant comes out.
Nibble, nibble, little mouse, who is nibbling at my house?
A woman as old as the hills. She is kind and feeds them and then puts them to bed. But it is all an act.
She was, in reality, a wicked witch who lay in wait for children and had only built their little house of bread in order to entice them there. When a child fell into her power, she killed it, cooked it, and ate it, and that was a feast day with her. Witches have red eyes and cannot see far, but they have a keen scent like the beasts, and are aware when human beings draw near. When Hansel and Gretel came into her neighborhood, she laughed with malice and said mockingly, "I have them. They shall not escape me again."
The next morning, she locks Hansel in the stable and makes Gretel cook for him to fatten him up for her feast. After 4 weeks, Hansel continues to trick the dim-eyed witch by letting her think a stick is his still thin finger. She loses patience, though, and decides to cook them both the next day. The witch's attempt to trick Gretel into climbing into the oven fails when the girl feigns ignorance. So the witch, in frustration, shows how easily her head fits in. And Gretel strikes.
When the witch was destroyed, the enchantment of the gingerbread house was broken, and Hansel and Gretel were free.
The children find riches in the witch's house and return home with them. Their stepmother mysteriously dead, they are left to live happily ever after with their father. The witch becomes a bogeyman figure, designed to scare children into becoming more careful. If in England, be careful walking around any body of water at night. Do not venture towards the edge, or you may see a long green form flit underwater, illuminated by moonlight. And if you're really not careful, Jenny Green Teeth will jump up from the muddy bottom, and you'll see her pale green skin and yellow eyes. As her long arms wrap around and crush you, her pointed green teeth will sink into your flesh. Jenny Greenteeth will eat you alive as her sharp nails run across your flesh, lulling you into a deep sleep. After she pulls you to the bottom with her, you will be lost forever.
Well, even though Poe ridiculed occult movements of his time, including the Swedenborgians and Andrew Jackson Davis and the spiritualists, he used the beliefs as inspiration for his short stories. And he was very interested early on in his career in stories about women who almost have spiritualist beliefs that border on witchcraft. And in Morella, from 1835, a woman is able to come back from the dead by possessing her daughter. In Ligeia, a woman, through sheer power of her will and occult knowledge, is able to come back from the dead and possess her husband's second wife. So Poe is able to touch on the pseudosciences, the occult beliefs of the day, and incorporate them into his fiction to chilling results.
It's 1900, and Lyman Frank Baum, one-time chicken breeder, fireworks salesman, theater goer, dry goods clerk, and Midwestern newspaper editor, is publishing his own fairy tale. The Wonderful Wizard of Oz will not only reinvent the genre, but also will cement the popular conception of the fairy tale witch.
Yet the old-time fairy tale, having served for generations, may now be classed as historical in the children's library. For the time has come for a series of newer wonder tales, in which the stereotyped genie, dwarf, and fairy are eliminated together with all the horrible and blood-curdling incidents devised by the authors to point a fearsome moral to each tale. Modern education includes morality. Therefore, the modern child seeks only entertainment in its wonder tales and gladly dispenses with all disagreeable incident.
His third children's book, he publishes The Wonderful Wizard of Oz with his illustrator, W.W. Denslow. The 10,000-copy first edition sells out before its actual release. It is an instant success that spawns 13 more books from Baum. The book starts when Dorothy Gale, who lives on a Kansas farm with her Aunt Em and Uncle Henry, is trapped in her house and carried on a twister into the magical land of Oz. Her house, it seems, has landed on the Wicked Witch of the East and has killed her. The benevolent Good Witch of the North sends Dorothy on to meet the wizard at the Emerald City, who can send her home to Kansas. On the way, Dorothy meets the Tin Woodsman, who lacks a heart, the Lion, who lacks courage, and the Scarecrow, who lacks a brain. In order to get back to Kansas, to get a brain, courage, and a heart, the four must kill the Wicked Witch of the West. This tiny witch wears an eye patch, but her one good eye can see everywhere like a telescope. She controls wolves, bees, and flying monkeys. She is killed when Dorothy flings a bucket of water on her, and she melts. But who was Dorothy Gale? It seems she is a composite of two girls, both of whom died tragically. Baum's niece, Dorothy Louise Gage, died in infancy, deeply affecting his wife. Allegedly, Baum also reads of a girl found dead after a twister strikes in Irving, Kansas. Her name was Dorothy Gale. As is typical at the time, and given Baum's love for theater, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz becomes a stage play on June 16, 1902. In 1908, Baum funds the Fairylog and radio plays, a combination film, slideshow, and stage show with actors. It's a financial disaster that sets him further back financially and forces him to grant the Oz rights to an associated film company, Selig Polyscope Company. In 1910, Selig uses the rights for a silent film version of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz based on the 1902 stage play. He moves to Hollywood and in 1914 starts the Oz Film Manufacturing Company. The company only lasts a year and produces 10 films, including 3 Oz films. Baum dies of a stroke on May 6, 1919. His final words to his wife:
Now we can cross the shifting sands.
But then, in 1939, MGM releases The Wizard of Oz, a musical filmed in Technicolor and starring Judy Garland as Dorothy. The lavish special effects and production make it a visual spectacle on par with Baum's vision. Not, however, with his vision of the Wicked Witch. Played by Margaret Hamilton, her green-skinned, hawk-nosed, cackling Wicked Witch of the West cements the 20th century image of witchery. And the film goes on to become a classic of cinema. As voodoo flourishes in Haiti, the similar yet separate voodoo takes root in Louisiana, developed around the Creole, African, American, and French traditions. This is a religion that incorporates dance, the use of amulets, and the worship of ancestors now gone.
When slaves were brought to this country, they were sort of forced to kind of accept Western religion. And underground, there was a bit of voodoo happening, which was a West African religion, and that kind of got blended in with Catholic and other beliefs, and this sort of melting pot of, the original pick and mix religion sort of created what we call voodoo. And a lot of voodoo is associated with different affects, like an amulet that you wear that protects you, or a doll that you put pins in that kind of can torment your enemy, or some kind of some beads that you throw, or there's all these sort of something you wear, something that you make, some sort of totem. There's a lot of these kind of magic put into these objects, and this magic doesn't usually come directly from the gods. There's always some sort of intermediate, like Baron Samedi is a figure where he was kind of an intermediate between the powers that be and the folks who were practicing the voodoo. So you get permission from this intermediate to sort of either protect yourself or somehow create a spell to get back at your enemies. And I think that there is some genuine fear about it because it's unknown and because it's underground. I think that it becomes a part of horror literature and horror movies quite easily. To modernize the practices of voodoo seem extremely exotic and foreboding, when really a lot of it comes from ourselves, and it comes from our own Western beliefs mixed in. It's still being practiced to this day as a religion. I don't think that there's anything particularly evil about voodoo. It's just another religion.
Presiding over voodoo rituals is a voodoo queen. The greatest of these queens is Marie Laveau, who lives in the city of New Orleans for close to the entire 1800s. Born on September 10, 1801, Marie Laveau was married in 1819 with her first husband and their 2 children together passing after a few short years. She remarries soon after and gives birth to 7 more children. It is also in the 1820s that Marie Laveau becomes Voodoo Queen of New Orleans. She tells the fortunes of the rich and reveals secrets that only the spirit world could know. Many men come to her for advice, including Aaron Burr and Lafayette. By 1842, Madame Laveau begins living on her own in a cottage on St. Anne Street. She ceases her reign as the Voodoo Queen of New Orleans in 1870 and passes the mantle to her daughter. Marie Glapion Laveau dies on June 15, 1881. The New York Times refers to her as one of the most wonderful women who ever lived, for her charitable and hospitable attitude towards others. Even today, there is a way to receive the counsel of Marie Laveau. Draw an X on her tomb, turn around 3 times, knock on the tomb, and then yell out your wish. If she grants it, you must return and circle your X, and leave Marie Laveau, the Voodoo Queen of New Orleans, a tribute. Then, there is the chance you will see her ghost walking between the tombs. It is 1905 on the Himalayan mountain Kangchenjunga. This is Aleister Crowley, and he will become known by 2 other names. One is the Great Beast. Another title that will not arrive until later matches the infamy that he generates throughout his life. That title, the wickedest man in the world. Outside his tent are a Swiss climber and 3 local porters, descending the mountain against his advice. Crowley, who had quarreled with the whole expedition, claims to have had no sympathy whatsoever. At this point in his life, Crowley has discovered his bisexuality, which was then a social taboo, and he has also discovered the occult. This has resulted in his joining the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, itself an occult society. He only remains a member for 1 year. In Cairo, Egypt, Crowley claims to have received psychic messages from a messenger of the Egyptian god Horus. This results in the publication of his Book of Law, which he uses to start his own religious movement, Thelema. Then comes the fateful expedition. In 1907, Crowley continues to experiment with hashish and communicates with Horus Prophet. He finds an occult order called AA as the successor to the Golden Dawn. 2 years later, Crowley performs an invocation to the demon Choronzon. It involves a blood sacrifice and seals his infamy as a Satanist. Crowley merely sees himself as a follower of magic, but welcomes the attention. In 1920, Crowley rents a villa in Sicily and christens it the Abbey of Thelema, a commune for himself and his followers. Terrible things happen there. It's enough that Crowley has become addicted to both heroin and cocaine, but the children of followers are given free rein and allowed to witness sex magic. A young Oxford graduate, Frederick Charles Loveday, arrives from London with his wife, Betty May, in 1923. Changing his name to Raoul, Loveday becomes a close disciple of Crowley. One fateful February morning, Raoul drinks from a stream. Crowley will later allege that he's warned the couple of its contamination. In less than 2 weeks, on Valentine's Day, Raoul dies of a liver infection. The British media, particularly the magazine John Bull, covers the story and declares that Crowley is the wickedest man in the world. More comes out from Raoul's widow, May. She claims Raoul had to drink the blood of a sacrificed cat and that Crowley holds orgies throughout the commune. As the government of dictator Benito Mussolini deports Crowley and his followers, the villa is abandoned. Angry villagers paint over Crowley's artwork in disgust. After many more adventures, while fighting declining health, Crowley resorts to living in a boarding house. On December 1st, 1947, Crowley's doctor refuses to refill a prescription for heroin. Crowley places a curse on the doctor shortly before he himself expires. The doctor is dead within 24 hours. The final act of the wickedest man on earth. A student of the occult, Gerald Gardner had met Crowley mere months before the great beast's death. A retired civil service worker, Gardner develops the Wiccan religion, one that will distance itself from the satanic version of witchcraft and return to the pre-Christian pagan roots. In Wicca, there are two deities, the horned god and the mother goddess, who can be viewed as anything from a single goddess to a triple goddess. A Wiccan, unlike the classic witch figure of legend, believes in its code to harm none, do what ye will. Covens, with their priests and priestesses, often cast spells within circles, not spells to curse, but ones to heal, to grant fertility or protection. Yet, we will still hold on to this fairy tale image of the wicked witch with crooked nose, warts, and black magic. Witches and warlocks can hide in broad daylight, unbeknownst to us. God help those of us who cross one. Next, we will encounter the beasts that hide in man's clothing. Things that, in many cases, were once human, but are cursed to become more than human. To lose control and become far more beastly than anything man could ever be. We will encounter werewolves and other shapeshifters and see the most savage of the monsters among us.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to help us produce more compelling historical content like this, please like, comment below, and share this video with fellow history buffs. And of course, be sure to subscribe to help keep history happening.